So Mr. Worldwide himself is back in action and going to be dropping in 2.2. I think that we've all known for a long time that Childe is one of miHoYo's absolute favorite children, but giving him 2 separate reruns while other characters haven't even gotten their first really cemented that into the record books. And while many players may have already picked up Childe, there are plenty of players that started playing Genshin Impact well after his rerun, and therefore you might be wondering whether or not you should pick him up. Or maybe you are an older player and have realized that the game has changed quite a bit since he originally released, maybe regretted not pulling him, and are wondering whether he's still viable now. So that's what we're going to be going over today. We're going to be taking an in-depth look into Childe and his kit and seeing whether he's actually worth pulling for. If you do end up finding the video helpful, please feel free to leave me a like and comment down below. It really does help me push into the YouTube algorithm and I greatly appreciate it. And if you want to see more Genshin Impact content from me, make sure to hit that subscribe button and click that notification bell. Alright, and with that, let's jump into the video. So as I previously mentioned, Childe has actually been rerun one time before this, leaving many players extremely frustrated because they're patiently waiting for characters like Ganyu, Albedo, and Xiao. But what if I told you that Childe was actually pretty underrated since the beginning of the game and is still underrated till this day? When Childe first released, he was marketed more as a main DPS character, when in actuality, he really isn't. The simple fact of the matter is that you can play Childe as a main DPS if you want to. His damage numbers are decent enough on his own, however he only truly shines when you do have a well-built team around him. You see, the best way to draw out Childe's true potential is by using him as a driver or hydro applicator. Now, what do I mean by this? When Childe switches into his melee stance form, he actually is one of the best hydro appliers in the entire game. Although I guess that isn't saying much considering that we only have 5 hydro characters. But that doesn't take away from the fact that Childe is still the best on-field hydro applicator in the game, and is therefore able to amplify his team's damage while also dealing consistent and strong damage himself. Now, why is this so important? Because that now means that you're able to free up either Xingqiu, Mona, or Kokomi depending on what you have, and slot them in onto your other team. Hydro supports are really sought after by almost every single DPS in the game. And I also think it's really important to keep in mind that we only have 5 hydro characters in Genshin Impact as of 2.2. Yes, you heard me right, we only have 5 hydro characters since release. And what's even more frustrating than that is the fact that 3 of these 5 characters are 5 stars, meaning the only characters that you can reliably get are Barbara and Xingqiu. And while Xingqiu is definitively one of the single best characters in Genshin Impact, Barbara is a little less desirable. So if you can free up that slot and give them to one of your other DPSs, you're gonna have a much easier time in Spiral Abyss. Is this 100% necessary to clear content? No, but it will make it a lot easier. Another thing that I really want to touch on and actually really bring attention to is the fact that miHoYo is really starting to shift us towards a quick swap meta. Now, why is this relevant to Childe? Well, in the past, one of the main reasons why Childe wasn't considered a top tier DPS was the fact that he couldn't stay on the field at all times. Childe's entire gimmick centers around the fact that he switches from his bow form to his melee form, deals a lot of damage during his melee form, but not very much damage during his bow form. But the issue really lay with the fact that once you ran out of your melee stance, then the cooldown would start on your bow form and you wouldn't be able to get back into your melee stance for a long time depending on how long you were originally in that melee stance. The monumental problem with this when Childe was first released was that people really wanted to go for characters that could stay on the field at all times because we only had enough resources to invest into a single DPS character. This meant that our support units were extremely underleveled and therefore Childe seemed extremely underwhelming. This is again due to the fact that Childe is way more suited for a quick swap gameplay style, and rather than being the sole source of DPS was actually supposed to be the one amplifying the rest of his team's damage. I think that this is why we are now seeing Childe appear far more in Spiral Abyss content, because now we actually have the supports in order to make him the best that he can be. In fact, it was only a few months ago that people realized that Childe and Xingling really paired so well together. This along with the addition of Kazuha in order to boost everyone's damage, and all the huge buffs that Xingling has gotten due to her access to more ER and free-to-play weapons, has skyrocketed this vaporized duo into the stratosphere. However, even with these recent developments, does that actually mean that he's more worth summoning than characters like Xiao, Hu Tao, and Ganyu? Well, if I'm being completely honest, probably not, but he's far more viable now than he's ever been. The sad fact of the matter is that characters like Ganyu, Hu Tao, and Xiao just honestly power crept Childe before he really had a chance to shine. These three heavily DPS oriented characters came out directly after Childe and instantly became fan favorites because they were able to deal out massive amounts of damage even all on their own. But one thing that I do want to mention is that unlike these other three characters, Childe is actually able to fully bring out the full potential of his teammates. Xiao is still, in my opinion, the most selfish DPS in the game. Hu Tao does give a little bit back to her teammates in terms of crit rate, but that's just about it. And Ganyu, well, Ganyu's actually good at everything. She's a main DPS, a support unit, whatever you want her to be. But even Ganyu, as good as she is, does not amplify her team's damage like Childe does. Unless you have her constellations, and not everyone is going to be able to get her constellations. So ultimately, I think it's going to come down to players' preferences and how they want to build their team and what playstyle they enjoy playing the most. If you want a single DPS character that stays out on the field at all times, then Childe really isn't for you. Childe is far more suited for a quick swap gameplay style, is far more reliant on his teammates to amplify his damage while also amplifying their damage. Also, if you are an aim and shoot type player, then Childe probably isn't for you, considering that he doesn't get most of his damage from his bow attacks. However, this in no way means that his bow stance isn't useful, because you can apply Riptide to enemies by using charge shots, and because he does have two completely different stances, it gives him a lot more flexibility over other characters that can typically only do one thing. This makes Childe kind of one of those characters that's a jack of all trades but master of none, and while that might be a turnoff for a lot of players, I actually do think that it does make him extremely viable and flexible for future team comps. Ultimately, what it takes to make Childe good at C0 is going to be managing your elemental cooldowns, pairing him with teammates that complement his quick swap gameplay style, and setting up for huge elemental reaction damage from his skill and his monumental burst. Oh yeah, and speaking of his burst is actually kind of insane. His burst is actually split into two separate forms depending on if you're in bow stance or melee stance. His bow stance burst does do a little bit less damage, but it does apply Riptide to all enemies that it hits. This is extremely useful not only because it does apply Hydro to all of those enemies, but also when you do finally get into your melee stance and then use your burst in melee stance, you're going to deal extra damage to all enemies that are afflicted with Riptide. And one of the nice things about Childe is that he doesn't really have energy recharge problems, meaning that you're probably going to get his burst up pretty soon. And while it might not be as powerful as a Hu Tao or Eula one-hit burst, it still does a lot of damage. Okay, but all that being said, where does that leave us? Should you or should you not summon for Childe? At the end of the day, I think it's going to come down to a few things. One, I don't think that you should pull Childe if you do not like his gameplay or the character himself. Childe is a good character, but if you don't enjoy his gameplay style, then it's really not worth it because you'll get better use out of another main DPS. But if you do like him, he's more than strong enough to be viable and definitely can hit pretty hard with the right team setup. I also really think it's important to look at your account and see what you're currently missing. Are you missing a Pyro character because Hu Tao's about to come out and you might want to summon for her? Or maybe you already have enough Pyro characters, Cryo characters, etc. and you don't have any Hydro characters, and he is one of the only 5 Hydro characters in the entire game as of recording. I don't know guys, I think that this is a pretty tough decision, but I really hope that going over everything step by step has helped you make a decision for yourself. If you did end up finding this video helpful at all and it helps you make a decision, please feel free to leave me a like and comment down below with what you're currently planning on doing. Not only does it help me boost into the YouTube algorithm, but I'm actually genuinely curious to see how many people are going to be summoning for Childe. Also, if you do want to see more Genshin Impact content from me, make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. I also made a similar video to this about Hu Tao, so if you're interested in that and wondering whether or not you should summon for her or Childe, then go ahead and check that video and compare. I'll make sure to leave a link above so that you can go check that out. Alright guys, that's all that I have for today. I hope that you guys are having a good one, and I'll see you in the next video. Alright, until next time, best wishes. Bye!